You're listening to The David Feldman Show. You happy, self-actualized humps.
Wall Street and the plutocrats who are meeting in Davos, they're all getting pretty spooked about AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and the 2020 presidential race. They don't like getting beaten up on. They're scared because they know they're all out of bullshit. Wall Street, the richest 1%, they're all out of fertilizer. And the American people are on to them. The American people, we know it's time to rein in Wall Street, break up the banks. It's time to have a speculation tax on every stock transaction. It's time to eliminate the carried interest loophole. And it's time to start taxing capital gains as income. If that doesn't make any sense to you, if you don't know what the carried interest loophole is and what a speculation tax means, then I suggest you ask your friend, the stockbroker. Ask your friend, the financial planner. Ask your friend, your neighbor, the Republican. Ask them about taxing capital gains as income. Ask them about eliminating the carried interest loophole. They won't know what it means. Donald Trump doesn't know what the carried interest loophole means, or what a speculation tax is. Because none of us, we're not supposed to know what this stuff means, because it's purposely complicated. It's tax speak, Wall Street speak, financialese, a type of language that means nothing because opacity is the engine of greed. But even though the American people don't understand any of this, because nobody understands it, but they do know that it's purposely complicated. And we've woken up. We know that this iteration of capitalism is failing us. We know that corporations and the super rich have too much influence on Washington, that they are destroying what's left of our healthcare system, what's left of our public schools, our jobs, and our ability to find affordable housing. They have successfully hijacked everything. They have hijacked the language and used it for obfuscation, discussions, and debate, disorient us with emotion as opposed to substance. And we see through it all because we look around us and we see a post-apocalyptic moonscape of no opportunity for 99% of Americans. Because ever since Bill Clinton turned the Democratic Party over to Wall Street, it is okay for a Democratic candidate. It is okay for a Hollywood liberal. It is okay for a Wall Street executive to say, I'm a liberal when it comes to social issues, but I'm fiscally conservative. I'm a liberal when it comes to social issues, but I'm a fiscal conservative. That sounds good. When somebody says they're fiscally conservative, when your Democratic friend, when your liberal friend says, I'm liberal on social issues, but I'm a fiscal conservative, ask them what fiscal conservative means. It means I couldn't care less if you smoke dope, marry another man, and listen to hip-hop. Just make sure I get to keep my money and I don't have to pay for your health insurance. That's what fiscal conservatism means. And we've been trained to believe that someone who is a fiscal conservative is the adult, the reasonable one, the person who sees nothing wrong with making money. But that's no longer what fiscal conservatism is. Fiscal is government spending. It's not family spending. It's not personal spending. It's not corporate spending. By definition, fiscal is government spending and government taxation. So a fiscal conservative means they're conservative when it comes to government spending and government taxation. So when somebody says, I'm a fiscal conservative, it means I think we should be conservative when it comes to government spending and government taxation. What has happened since Ronald Reagan is that fiscal conservatism morphed into fiscal fascism. Rarely does the government fine-tune the economy the way Keynes suggested. Cutting taxes and cutting spending, austerity, doesn't make you a fiscal conservative. It makes you a fiscal fascist. What has happened since Reagan took office is the government has no say in the direction of our economy. Instead of debating fiscal policy in Congress, and by that debating what do we spend as a government and what do we tax as a government, and instead of the government getting to debate fiscal policy, we've turned all the power of our economy to decide the future of our economy. We've turned it all over to the Federal Reserve, a bank that can't be audited, a bank that answers to nobody, a central banker. So instead of our economy being tweaked by fiscal policy, government spending, government taxation, our economy instead is guided primarily by the Federal Reserve through interest rates. And that's called monetary policy, which is set by a handful of bankers over at the Federal Reserve who decide by themselves unilaterally when the economy is too hot and when it's too cold. Now, the mandate of the Federal Reserve, it's about 100 years old, the mandate of the Federal Reserve is to keep both inflation and unemployment in check. But instead, the Federal Reserve acts like a bank and cares only about one thing, and that is inflation, the value of the dollar. It wants to keep inflation down, which is why, since Reagan, we have had decades of interest rate moves predicated on how it will affect the money supply. If there's too much money in the system, there's inflation. So the Federal Reserve, the central banker, has to make sure that there's just the right amount of money out there circulating so that inflation stays low. They're not thinking about unemployment. By turning our economy over to the Federal Reserve, which has happened since Reagan has taken office, we now have Republicans and Democrats who are fiscal fascists. We don't get to say anything about the direction of the economy. The direction of the economy is no longer decided by Congress. It's decided by a handful of bankers who couldn't care less what ordinary Americans need. Central bankers work for and service other banks and other corporations who all want cheap money because cheap money means low interest rates, and low interest rates mean regular Americans are paid low wages while being offered credit cards to make up for what they lack in capital. So the banks, the credit cards, they get low interest rates from the Federal Reserve, and they return the favor to the American people for those low interest rates by charging as much as 24% on your credit card. So what does it mean when somebody says they're fiscally conservative? It means they believe in austerity, no government spending, small government, pay-go, balance the budget, but balance the budget by cutting government programs. Balance the budget by turning government service over to corporations. Balance the budget by dealing only with spending. And create more debt. Create more debt, that's right, by cutting taxes for the richest 1%. How can you call yourself a fiscal conservative? How is it fiscally conservative to cut taxes for the richest 1% and create a ballooning deficit, which always happens when a Republican, including Reagan, takes office? Reagan, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump, they cut taxes for the wealthiest 1%, calling themselves fiscal conservatives. And what happens to the budget deficit? What happens to the debt? Under Reagan, it quadrupled. That's what a fiscal conservative means. It used to mean something else, but that's what your uncle means when he says he's a fiscal conservative. But I doubt your uncle even knows what he means when he says he's a fiscal conservative. He just knows that white men in suits are fiscal conservatives. And he wants to identify with that tribe because it makes him feel disgusting when he identifies with his neighbor who, just like your uncle, is probably broke and probably in debt. Most people who claim to be fiscally conservative are the same people who have no money, massive credit card debt, but exquisite taste in clothes, restaurants, and furniture. Fiscal conservative sounds tasteful. It's elegant. It makes it sound like you have some sort of oak-paneled brain. But the truth is, people who call themselves fiscal conservative are lying to you and to themselves. They're broke. They're in debt. They're using language, once again, to disguise the truth. Fiscal conservatives, for 40 years, have racked up huge debt because they're constantly cutting taxes on the wealthiest people and corporations. The budget deficit for 2019 is going to top $1 trillion. Why? Government spending? No, because of the tax cut that went into effect last year. How is that fiscal conservatism? How is that good for the economy? It's fiscal recklessness, but they must reframe it and call it fiscal conservatism. It's fiscal anarchy. And by turning the fate of our economy over to the Federal Reserve, like I said before, it's fiscal fascism. We have no say. The Clinton wing, the Obama wing of the Democratic Party, they're the ones who are socially liberal but fiscally conservative. Because the Democrats are terrified of being the party of inflation. Because that's what killed Carter's presidency, supposedly. That's how history was rewritten. He took over after Nixon and Ford couldn't whip inflation now, and he had 4 years to defeat profligate spending by Richard Nixon to fight the Vietnam War. Despite how history remembers Jimmy Carter, he did beat inflation. He had 4 years to beat inflation, and he did. He made Paul Volcker the head of the Fed, and Paul Volcker was the one who kept raising interest rates until he crushed inflation. But, of course, Ronald Reagan misled the American people, the media misled the American people, and convinced the American people that Jimmy Carter was responsible for the inflation, when in fact it was starting to come down under Carter. Reagan and Alan Greenspan get all the credit for lowering inflation when it was Paul Volcker and Jimmy Carter who are responsible for bringing inflation down. As usual, the Democrats fix something, and the Republicans are the beneficiary of that fix, and then go on a reckless financial binge that ends up crashing the system.
You're listening to The David Feldman Show. You happy, self-actualized humps.
So the issue of our time is the economy. Are the millennials going to participate in our economy? The issue of our time is climate change. Will there be an economy to participate in? So this morning, I decided to go to Senator Elizabeth Warren's campaign page to find out more about her position on corporate governance. She wants to pass legislation that would insist that 40% of any publicly held corporation's board of directors would be comprised of workers and labor representatives. You know, corporations are chartered, and the federal government can make laws that dictate corporate governance. And it's a good idea that 40% of any publicly held corporation's board of directors were made up of workers and labor representatives. It's what they do in Germany. And Germany not only has a thriving middle class with a strong safety net, they also have a GDP that is the envy of Europe. To my chagrin, there are no policy statements over at Elizabeth Warren's website. Now, I like Elizabeth Warren. I love Elizabeth Warren. And for me, it's either her or Bernie. Originally, Bernie wanted Elizabeth to run for president in 2016. She demurred, so Bernie ran for president, and he transformed our democracy. Everything Bernie Sanders talked about in 2016 is going to be in the Democratic platform for 2020. Truly transformative. Can you think of a presidential candidate in recent memory who actually was allowed to get on primetime television and trash Wall Street and the health insurance corporations? You're not allowed to talk that way on primetime television. But there was so much anger that he tapped into back in 2016. Voters broke free of the linguistic chains. And the networks had no choice but to talk about what Bernie was talking about. Cut to 2020. Cut to the debates that are coming up, where you're going to have 20 Democratic candidates debating and talking about all the things they weren't allowed to talk about until Bernie ran in 2016. They're going to be talking about Medicare for all, Wall Street, free tuition in our public colleges and universities, and suing the oil companies over climate change. Couldn't get elected talking about that in 2012. Now it's going to be the only way to get the nomination for the Democratic Party. You have to talk about it. And if you're a Democrat and you don't understand that, it's time to go away. You're not part of the problem. You are the problem. Now, a lot of people think Elizabeth Warren might be more electable than Bernie. I don't know, but I'm not really sure what that means. More electable. More electable. That is not a conversation we need to be having in the Democratic Party. That's a serious problem within the Democratic Party, the conversation over who's more electable. In the Democratic Party, there's an epidemic of not-so-smart Democrats who don't have a clue as to how politics actually work. But they insist on talking about which candidate can win, as opposed to which candidate could fix the problems facing this country. Because we have a problem in this Democratic Party of Democrats who refuse to identify what the problems are because they're out of touch. I'm not talking about the upper echelons of the Democratic Party. I'm talking about the self-identified rank-and-file members of the Democratic Party who are completely out of touch because they have a job, they have a home and health care, or they're broke, in debt. But because they're educated, as Democrats often seem to be, they identify with their corporate oppressors. They'd rather root for their team and hope it wins, even if their team couldn't care less about them. They're the problem with the Democratic Party. It's not just the Obamas and the Clintons. It's the people who identify with the Obamas and the Clintons, who don't realize that they're nothing like the Obamas and the Clintons. Just because you have a college degree and you read and you believe in the Enlightenment, you have nothing else in common with the Obamas and the Clintons. If you're a Democrat, but you're not willing to engage in class warfare against the billionaire class, get out of the Democratic Party. Go vote for the Republicans. Don't misunderstand me. I am not declaring that it's time for class warfare. I'm saying there's been a war on the working class and the poor for 40 years, ever since Reagan was sworn in, and it's time to fight back. Class warfare started 40 years ago, and it's time to start defending ourselves against the richest 1%. If you don't see that, as a Democratic voter, if you don't see that as a Democratic candidate, then get out of the party and make room for the 100 million Americans who don't vote because nobody has ever represented their needs, their concerns. There are 100 million Americans who don't vote. They could, but they don't. And instead of formulating policy to attract those 100 million voters who stay home, Democrats, you, me, the registered Democrats who vote in primaries, we try to act smarter than we really are. When we vote in these presidential primaries, we don't vote on substance. Instead, we flatter ourselves by thinking we're insiders helping to pick the next Democratic nominee. The primaries, when we vote in the primaries, we view it as a casting call, and we're the director. And instead of voting for somebody whose policy we believe in, we pick someone who can act the part of the winner. Because winning is much more important than doing anything that benefits the American people. That's what it means to be the adult in the room. When we talk about electability, it makes us feel like we're the adult in the room, that we're on the inside track, that we're smarter than other Democrats, because we're saving the Democrats from themselves. I've been guilty of this at times. We vote for the candidate who's more practical, who can win in November. And that's exactly why 100 million voters stay home on Election Day, because we have two parties who are like two hyenas competing to pick at the same carcass, and there's no more meat left, only bone. That's why the elections are always so close. They're always so close because there's no more meat. It's just bone. So they focus group all their policy decisions, and elections, presidential elections, become tight because there's no difference. Now, of course, there's a little difference between the two parties, but certainly not enough. Assuming the role of adult in the room, it doesn't make you wise. It makes you sclerotic, old. It makes you irrelevant. I don't want to be the adult in the room. You either see the problems facing everybody in this country, income inequality, climate destruction, and you either figure out how to address these problems head on, or you can be the fool, the adult in the room, do what the Democrats have been doing since the first Clinton administration, and try to win. You try to win. That's the way Democrats get away with winning, but never serving their constituents, by never serving the 99%. The way the Democrats win, and they're doing it now, they demonize the Republicans. So the issue becomes stopping them. That's the goal now. We have to find somebody who can beat Trump. Back in 2000, 2004, we had to find somebody to beat George W. Bush, because that's good enough. It's good enough to be good enough. We're seeing it in 2020 as the presidential election heats up. Democrats, the ones I know who plan to vote in the primaries, all they talk about is we got to beat Trump. We got to beat Trump. Why? Why do we have to beat Trump? We got to beat him. He's evil. But nobody's talking about policy. The only policy they have is we got to beat the other team. The future of our country is at stake. So when you pick a candidate who can stop evil, you don't need to offer a real alternative. You end up with do-nothings like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama. Two candidates I voted for, but make no mistake about it, they were shills for Wall Street. Barack Obama took more money from Goldman Sachs than any of the candidates. Hillary delivered those speeches at Goldman Sachs for hundreds of thousands of dollars. When Hillary and Bill do something like that, when Hillary and Bill have earned close to $100 million speaking before Wall Street and other corporate retreats, it's not just unseemly, it belies where their priorities really are. And they get away with it because Democrats have been taught to accept that successful people are entitled to make vast sums of money, because there's nothing wrong with making vast sums of money. And the people who control the Democratic Party, the adults in the room, have peddled this free market theology, a religion, and like all religions, it's fueled by myths, not reality. They peddle this religion that in America, we celebrate the free market, we celebrate people who earn money, because that's what this country was founded on, making money. And that's why you can make excessive sums of money and get to keep it and not feel bad about it. That's the Republican dogma. Unfortunately, it's also the Democratic Party's dogma. Since the first Clinton administration, the Democratic Party has been offering up a special dispensation. The way the Democratic Party collects this money, they offer up a special dispensation to Wall Street and the bankers who know they're evil. See, the Clinton plan, the Barack Obama plan, it allows you to be greedy. You can destroy factories, prop up the health insurance companies. But if you give a little money to the Democrats, you're a saint. You're clean. You're socially liberal, but fiscally conservative. Barack Obama, like the Vatican during the Renaissance, is selling indulgences to Goldman Sachs so they can finish construction. That's what the Vatican did with the Medicis. You sell indulgences. You allow corporations, thieves, and billionaires to do evil things. But if you give to the Democrats, you're socially liberal. And it sounds so nice, doesn't it? I'm socially liberal. I give to the Democrats. I'm sure Lloyd Blankfein, who used to run Goldman Sachs, or the Sackler family, which owns Purdue, the pharmaceutical giant that created the opioid crisis. I'm sure Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. I'm sure he and his children are all socially liberal. I'm sure they all find Donald Trump unseemly. I'm sure their idiot kids who stand to inherit billions of dollars all call themselves socially liberal. And if you ask them, they're fiscally conservative. But they don't really think about that. And if they do think about it, they don't like to talk about it because they really know what fiscal conservative means. But they get away with it because most Americans don't know what it means. Most Democrats don't know what it means to be fiscally conservative. It sounds like you're an adult in the room. If you're fiscally conservative, it means you think gays should marry, but you couldn't care less if their kids starve to death or die from lack of health insurance. That's what it means to be socially liberal, but fiscally conservative. Go be a Republican with your, we need to be practical when it comes to free tuition at public universities. You know, we have to be careful, though. There's a lot of waste. But massive tax cuts to the richest 1%, no waste there. For 40 years, we've been giving massive tax cuts to the richest 1% and driving up the debt and the budget deficit. But there's no hand-wringing about the waste there from our fiscal conservatives who say we have to be really careful about Medicare for all. So go be a Republican. The problem with the Democratic Party is they've been taken over by rich people who want to keep their money but not feel guilty about keeping it. Yes, climate change is horrible, unless, of course, it means it's going to cost me money to do something about it.
You're listening to The David Feldman Show. You happy, self-actualized hump.
The Democrats are convinced they need Wall Street because Wall Street has convinced them they need Wall Street. But they didn't always need Wall Street. They used to need labor unions and the working man. They used to need people who were ashamed to be billionaires. But things are changing. There are now calls within the Democratic Party, not just for an income tax, but for a wealth tax. A wealth tax. If you have more than $50 million, there's a call to tax it at 2% a year. Howie Klein has been writing about the people who have been writing about this, and I suggest you go to Down with Tyranny and read about this. There's finally a conversation that we've been needing to have for decades. Is there such a thing as being too wealthy? AOC says there is. AOC says there's something diseased about an American having $1 billion while kids 2 miles away are food insecure. We need to have a calm, rational discussion in this country about what constitutes too much wealth. Money is good. It's a language. It reflects our values. There's nothing wrong with money. It's what we do with the money. It's how we make that money. Money is food, but if we have too much food, if we consume too much food, it will kill us. And hoarding all the food, if you hoard food, people starve. And I refuse to accept, there is nothing you can tell me to think otherwise, that it is healthy for someone to have more than $1 billion. It's not healthy for the kids, and it's certainly not healthy for the country. I see nothing wrong with making $1 billion. I see nothing wrong with amassing a great fortune. It's a great way to keep score. But I see no reason that money should be passed on to your children once you die. I think you're entitled to pass on some of that money, a livable wage. But in what universe is it acceptable for the heirs of the Walmart fortune to inherit billions of dollars by virtue of the mere fact that their father was Sam Walton? In what universe is it acceptable that because the Walton family won the lottery by being born to Sam Walton, they have been imbued with some sort of wisdom on how to fix our public schools which they are now stepping into for the very first time? You can keep your noblesse oblige. What destroyed the British Empire eventually was the rot within its aristocracy. Our founding fathers didn't want an aristocracy. What destroyed the British Empire was the grandson of the industrialist who inherited the title of Baron or Earl, and then false credentialed his way into the upper reaches of government, way out of their league. They were way out of their league, these aristocrats. They were ignorant, and eventually they left the British Empire totally unprepared to take on Stalin and Hitler. What will save America isn't an aristocracy or this meritocracy, another myth like the free market, that there's some kind of meritocracy in America. When Brett Kavanaugh's parents spent $240,000 to send him to Georgetown Prep, but we're supposed to believe that he got into Yale because he's smart, and it was a level playing field. There's no such thing as a meritocracy. What will save America is a genuine level playing field where we can compete against each other in a game called capitalism. And then when the whistle blows and the game is over, each day we go back to a clean locker room, locker rooms that have showers with no lead in the water. By the way, there's still lead in the water in Flint, Michigan, still undrinkable. And we go home and we get a good night's sleep and then hit the field tomorrow for another game of capitalism. It's a game. Capitalism, jobs, earning money, it's a game. It's a good game. I think healthy competition is good. Some people are better at it than others. If they work harder, train harder, want it more, they go ahead and score a few more points, they should get to keep their points. But it's not a zero-sum game. You don't get to take away the opposing team's points and keep them. You don't get to keep everything. But that's what's happened in America. The richest 1% are a black hole sucking in all the capital. It's not a level playing field. Capitalism only works when the playing field is level. Adam Smith believed in guardrails. Would you enjoy a football game if there were no refs? If there were no rules? If we just said, okay, here's a football, get it past the opposing side and run into the end zone by any means necessary. Put as many players on the field as you want. Here are some battering rams, a tank, a gun. Have at it. Is that what you want to see? Well, it would probably make for an interesting game, but that's not football. It's Australian rules rugby. You can't play the game unless there are rules, and those rules have to be obeyed, and that's why we need government regulators who are making sure that all Americans get to compete on a level playing field. Because, yes, it's America and competition is good. But people stop competing when they realize the game is fixed. They stop playing the games if it's fixed. And they fill us with this disease. They fill us with lies. They sell us ideas that they have $1 billion. Their kids have $1 billion, not because they're lucky, not because they're bullies, not because they lied and cheated. They have $1 billion because they're the beneficiary of this mythical free market. Instead of what the real truth is, that they inherited money, or they went to Washington and changed the tax rules so that the wealth is distributed upwards, they sell us the lie of the free market. There's no such thing as a free market. They have to lie to us because they're terrified. The billionaires use terms to frighten us when we talk about coming for their money. The billionaires work very hard to confuse us, to manipulate us, to terrify us, to flatter us, to convince us that it's our fault we're broke and in debt, because they're afraid we're going to come for their money. The same way, for the past 40 years, they have manipulated the tax laws to come for ours. I really think it's time for the Democrats to get real and start talking about coming for the billionaire class's money. It's time to come for their money. Nobody should have more than $1 billion. Taxing wealth will not pay for Medicare for all. What taxing wealth does is it takes money away from the 1%. It takes away their power. You can't have a democracy when wealth is concentrated in so few hands. The wealthy always complain about how Washington can't get into the game of wealth distribution. Remember when Barack Obama was talking to Joe the plumber and he accidentally said, we need a little wealth redistribution. That's what Barack Obama said. And He was crucified by the networks and the news media and the Republicans. He had to walk it back. But Washington is all about redistributing the wealth. Since Reagan took office, the supply-siders have redistributed the wealth so that the wealthy get to keep more of it. That's a fact. That's a fact. When you look at the last tax bill that was passed, that was a giveaway to corporations and to the wealthiest 1%. That is the redistribution of wealth through taxation. And billionaires get those tax breaks not because they've worked hard. They get that extra money because the playing field, their grounds crew of lawyers and accountants, tilts the playing field in their favor. They rewrite the rule book so they can win. 2020 marks the 40th anniversary of Ronald Reagan's ascendancy to the presidency, or as I call it, his descendancy. It ushered in an era that descended all the way back to when we were under British rule. When we answered to rulers, to an aristocracy, they did it by rejiggering the tax code. So that's why we have 100 million people who don't vote. They see no choice, and they end up having to do jury duty. It is the role of the Democratic Party to speak to those 100 million people who stay home on Election Day. Responsibility of the Democratic Party to explain what's in it for those 100 million people to get off their couch and vote. Who are those 100 million people? I think they're the ones who fell through the cracks. They disappeared from our workforce. They're not counted as the unemployed. And if everything about our government reeks of the ruling class and you've fallen through the cracks and there is very little that our state and federal government has to offer you, why would you vote? The free market, as I said, is a religion, a ridiculous religion that means nothing. There's a better religion. It's called democracy. Like the free market, there's no such thing as democracy, but it's a better ideal. It's a better aspiration than the free market. Democracy is what people are willing to die for. Nobody's willing to die for the free market. When we fought Hitler, we were told we were fighting for democracy. We didn't send our men and women to Europe and Japan to fight for capitalism or the free market. We sold war by telling the American people they were dying for democracy. During the Cold War, the debate between the Soviet Union was framed as communism versus democracy. Communism is an economic system, but democracy is a political system. Why didn't our American leaders frame it as communism versus capitalism? Or better yet, communism versus the free market? Because that's a tough sell to the American people. It's hard to preach the free market. It's hard to convince people to die for the free market when there is no free market, when the government is ponying up trillions of dollars and pouring it into the military-industrial complex. No, it's better to tell the American people this is a war for democracy. We're coming up on the 40th anniversary of Ronald Reagan telling the American people that government isn't the solution, it's the problem. We're coming up on 40 years of the Laffer curve, supply-side economics, the trickle-down theory, 40 years of a religious dogma that insists if you cut taxes for the rich, they will create jobs for the rest of us. 40 years of income and wealth redistribution, supply-side economics, the idea that if you let people who have the supply of money keep their supply of money instead of taxing it, they will use that vast amount of money to create more manufacturing, more investment, more jobs for all Americans, good-paying jobs. Well, we've had 40 years to test this. The results are in. America, are you better off than you were 40 years ago? We cannot discuss the future of America until we acknowledge that we have lived under a 40-year redistribution of wealth that went upwards. And if you don't believe that, that's fine. But get out of the Democratic Party. Do I believe in purity tests on this issue? Yeah. Go be a Republican. If you think that 40 years of Reaganomics, 40 years of cutting taxes for the rich was not a redistribution of wealth upwards, if you think it didn't create massive income and wealth inequality, if you don't think a tax system that favors the wealthy ends up concentrating wealth in fewer and fewer hands, That's fine. But go be a Republican. Because that's what Republicans believe. They believe that billionaires are job creators. And the more billions they're allowed to keep from the IRS, the more jobs they're going to create. They're wrong, but it's okay, as long as they're Republicans. Supply-side economics, trickle-down, Reaganomics, the Laffer curve, it's garbage. If you believe it's better for the country, better for our democracy, better for the health of our children, when billionaires pay fewer, not more, pay less, not more in taxes, then that's fine. But go be a Republican. That's a Republican argument, not a Democratic one. And the Democrats, up until Bill Clinton, knew that. They fought Reagan. Walter Mondale, Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, they fought Reagan. Even George Herbert Walker Bush called it voodoo economics when he ran for president in 1980. But he quickly absorbed that nonsense to serve as Reagan's vice president. Bush was right the first time. It's voodoo economics. But his son preached it, practiced it, and crashed the economy. That's who the GOP is. That's all the GOP is. They only want to reduce taxes for the very rich by any means necessary. It's why the Republicans haven't turned on Trump. He got them their tax cut in 2017. That's why so many in the GOP stand with him. Plus, Putin probably has stuff on half the Republican leadership, but mostly the tax cuts. Don't tell me the Democratic Party should be a big tent and we need to be the adults in the room. And we need to nominate candidates who are friendly to Wall Street. Wall Street is not your friend, although friends do borrow money and never pay it back. We already have a party that peddles that myth that Wall Street is our friend. The Democrats need to be the party of democracy. And democracy dies when a handful of billionaires control all the wealth. Because ever since Citizens United, the Supreme Court has told us money is speech. And the more money you have, the more speech you have, which means you can drown out serious conversations about supply-side economics. If you have enough money, you can drown out any conversation that questions Reaganomics. That's why we need to tax the billionaires. They have too much speech. They use too much of their money to buy off not just politicians. They buy magazines, news networks, think tanks, chairs inside universities. That's all speech that has been purchased. And if you're on the receiving end of that money, if you're over at the Heritage Foundation and your checks are cut by the Koch brothers and you're the economics guy, then you're going to spout supply-side economics. You'll get all your facts jumbled. It doesn't matter because you're being paid to say whatever is necessary to perpetuate the lie that tax cuts for billionaires is a net gain, is a win-win for the working class. Learn about Stephen Moore, the buffoon. He started Club for Growth, then got a job writing editorials for the Wall Street Journal, and now he's the economics guy at the Heritage Foundation. He can't be fact-checked. He gets everything wrong. Paul Krugman over at the New York Times has been all over this louse. But it doesn't matter that Stephen Moore is a liar or a buffoon. As long as he sticks with the billionaire script, the script that was handed to him by the billionaires, his check's clear. People have no shame. They will do anything for money. Look at Rudy Giuliani. This is a relatively credentialed guy, former mayor of New York, a federal prosecutor. I don't think this is a cash run for him right now with Trump. I think he's doing exactly what Paul Manafort did when he worked for Trump. I guarantee you Giuliani's working for Trump for free or for a nominal fee. He's defending Trump, if you want to call it that, because Rudy's thinking about his next gig. Why? He's got 3 ex-wives. Rudy has 3 ex-wives and a soon-to-be 4th ex-wife. He needs money. He's not going to get it from Trump, but he's hoping some of the shine will make him desirable to other people who need his work. Because he's broke. The same year Rudy took a job defending Trump, last year, Rudy's wife, Judith, filed for divorce. Rudy is now going through his 4th divorce. He's 74. He's broke. He needs money. And this divorce, this wife, Judith, they were married for 15 years. And guess what those last 15 years have been? Those were the years when Rudy cashed out, when he stopped being America's mayor and became Wall Street's mayor. He made millions during the past 15 years, and Judith was there for all of it. She went on the entire ride with him. How much do you think is left? Because the lawyers are going to take all of it, and so is she. That's why he's making a complete fool out of himself on national television, saying no collusion. He needs to get out there. He needs camera time to make money. There are reports that he's drunk, that he's been drinking before his television appearances. If you were in your mid-70s, would you be doing what Giuliani is doing? Unless you needed the money? That's why he's shilling for Trump. He needs the money, and he's not smart. So Trump likes him. After the first attack on the World Trade Center, Rudy put the Terrorist Command and Control Center inside the World Trade Center, even though he was told it was a stupid idea. Giuliani is not a smart guy. He was the law and order mayor, but that law and order only applied to minorities. He made New York safe for Wall Street billionaires by making sure they didn't have to worry about getting mugged on their way to mugging the rest of America. As mayor of New York, Rudy enforced the idea that the law only applies to people of color, and the police can do no wrong, unless, of course, they arrest a billionaire. Which is why I'm so glad to see him wallow through his fourth divorce. What an idiot to get married 4 times and get divorced 4 times. What a loser. Oh, he's suffering. Divorce is the Wild West. It's Manhattan real estate. It's a bunch of sleazy, expensive attorneys who win because there are no laws. There are no rules. It's a Hobbesian nightmare where might makes right. That's Trump's world. You heard the tapes of Michael Cohen threatening that reporter, threatening to drive that guy into bankruptcy over the legal fees. Because law is not a level playing field, especially civil law. It's who can afford to keep the lawsuit going the longest. You read the text from Roger Stone to my friend Randy Credico. It's all in the Mueller indictment. Stone threatened to kill Randy and his dog. That's Trump's world, where Jared Kushner's father spent 14 months in Montgomery Federal Prison for making illegal campaign contributions, where he blackmailed his own brother-in-law by filming him with a prostitute. There's your richest 1%. They're your billionaires, or your billionaire wannabes, like Rudy Giuliani and Roger Stone, these servile supplicants who hope little of that money trickles down on them. They serve the richest 1% because they hope they'll get some of it. But Trump isn't paying them. Trump doesn't pay anybody because Trump isn't a billionaire, and he's certainly not a job creator. The Kushners aren't job creators. They're job inheritors who are short-sighted and lack the creativity to create anything original. They go to where money already exists or money they inherited and then rack up immense debt destroying businesses. Rudy Giuliani is an imbecile. 4 divorces? You know, I can understand maybe making the mistake twice. At some point, you have to check your bottom line. You have to calculate the money going in, the money going out, and realize marriage doesn't really work for me. But, you know, he believes the myth because he's an idiot. He probably even believes in supply-side economics because he's an idiot. Giuliani believes that all he has to do is get close to wealth and he'll get some. But he doesn't get any. Giuliani, like Manafort, thinks some of that Trump magic will wear off on him. And the Trump magic has worn off on Manafort and Roger Stone. And soon it will rub off on Giuliani by making him broken and broke. Sweeping generalizations, you say? Okay. How many billionaires have you rubbed elbows with? How many? That's my point. These so-called job creators, have you ever met one? Of course not, because they exist on some other astral plane. You don't meet billionaires. Tell me how that is good for us or our democracy, or even for them. It's not good for anybody. So it's time to come for their money. I want it. Taxing billionaires works for the sole purpose of taking away their money. It is time for billionaires to be terrified because after 40 years, the American people are on to you. There's no way to become a billionaire. You can't keep those billions unless You're manipulating Washington. That's a fact. Things that were once illegal are now legal. That's why we have so many billionaires. Things that were once unseemly are now normal. That's why we have so many billionaires. And the time has come for the American people to want the same exact thing the richest 1% want: money. Because money will give us jobs, jobs with dignity. Money will give us health care, homes, and free education. We want your money. And the only reason we're not getting that money is because of tribal resentment. I have friends, liberals, who spent 6 hours this past week studying those tapes from the Washington Mall where there was this tribal showdown between a Native American, a Catholic schoolboy, and some black Israelites. And there was this rush to judgment on Twitter that unearthed all the fault lines in America. That kid from the Catholic school, the black Israelites, and the Native American. But those fault lines are counterfeit. Because that kid from the Catholic school, the black Israelites, and the Native American, they have more in common with each other than the billionaires who delight in this tribalism. Because we all know this. We all know that time spent fighting among ourselves is time not spent taking money away from the billionaires. I don't know if that Catholic schoolboy from Covington has a punchable face or not. Maybe it should be punched. I think a lot of people could use a punch in the face. But I want to make sure that after his face is punched, he has free health care, and he can step foot in any emergency room and have his face repaired for free so it can be punchable once more. That's the issue. But instead, we hate each other. Read about what Patton Oswalt did with his troll. There was somebody trolling him on Twitter, and Patton looked into it, and it turns out that troll had health issues and was broke. So what did Patton do? He raised $50,000 on a GoFundMe for that troll. You can argue and fight about politics. I could hate you. I want you to have health care. I want you to have a job, a home. I want you to be able to go to a public university for free. And I want to be able to punch you in the face and go get it repaired for free. In order for us to stop with the tribalism, that requires Elizabeth Warren to have a website with policy on it. That requires the news media to discuss tax policy and wealth inequality and why 100 million people don't vote. Where are they, those 100 million people who don't vote? Stop arguing this nonsense. Stop talking about the kid from Covington Catholic School. Ask yourself, what do you want? Ask your fellow Democrat, what do you want? Not what is feasible, not what is practical, not who is electable. Ask yourself what you want for yourself, your kids, and this country. And if you can't answer that question, you're watching too much television. You're spending too much time on Twitter being outraged. Ask yourself what you want for yourself, your kids, and this country, and your party. And if you can't answer that, there's something wrong with you. It's not good enough to want the Democratic Party to win. Figure out what you want. You want Medicare for all. You want high-paying jobs, a livable wage, free public education, clean water, clean air, vacations, a safe home. We want the guns off our streets. The 40-year Reagan experiment is over, and it failed. So what do you want? That scene on the Washington Mall, what does any of that have to do with what you want? That's just more dirt thrown in your eyes so you can't see what you want. Is Elizabeth Warren not as electable as Kamala Harris? That's not the question you need to be asking. When you ask that question, you're pretending to be smart. Electability is a nebulous construct, as though you can predict who's going to win an election. Jeb Bush was electable. So was Hillary Clinton. So stop asking who is electable, because that conversation is about nothing. What do you want? And which one of your candidates, which one of these candidates do you think is talking about what you want? Senator Elizabeth Warren is a great senator. I will vote for her gladly. But when I go to her website, I should be seeing more than her biography and links that fight back on the personal attacks against her. I should be seeing links that take me to what she wants for America. So stop with the nonsense. The doomsday clock is fast approaching 0 hour. We had 40 years under Reagan to try greed, ignoring climate change. Stop being the adult in the room. It's unbecoming. It's unseemly. Because it doesn't make you look smart. It doesn't make you sound wise. The reason so many Democrats like being the adult in the room when it comes to politics is probably because they can't be the adult in the room when they're around their children. Have you tried being an adult in the room around your kids and their friends? We're irrelevant. Baby boomers, we're irrelevant. We left our children with a planet that has, if we're lucky, 20 more years. We left our children with student loan debt and an economy with no jobs. But what do the baby boomers, the adults in the room, complain about? Ageism. We don't get any respect. Why won't the millennials respect us? You stupid fool. Look at what you did. You destroyed everything, and now you want to be thanked? You want respect? You want to be rewarded for the state of the planet? It's time for a purity test. I don't want the Democrats to have any more adults in the room. Let the Republicans be the party of adults in the room, because they're the ones who are all about destroying everything and then asking for a thank you note. They're the ones who complain that millennials get a trophy for everything. Who do you think they learned that from? Who gave them those trophies for doing absolutely nothing? It was the adults in the room. If you don't think Medicare for all is the issue of our time, if you don't think we need clean air, clean water, if you don't think it's time to hold the oil companies legally responsible for climate change, if you don't think this country should deliver free public education to anybody who wants it at every public university, if you don't think it's high time to tax the wealthiest 1% into oblivion, if you don't think it's time to pass laws that encourage labor unions, if you don't think it's time that there are laws that mandate 40% of every publicly held corporation's board of directors must be workers and union reps. If you don't believe in that, that is fine. But if you call yourself a Democrat, go fuck yourself.
You're listening to The David Feldman Show. You happy, self-actualized humps.
For more on the fate of the Democratic Party and how you can engage in class warfare, I invite you to visit me over at davidfeldmanshow.com. And while you're over there, please sign up for my newsletter. From the KPFK studios in Southern California, I'm David Feldman, Medicare for All.
This is the David Feldman Radio Network.